Think about a woman, let's call her Danielle. Danielle is 34. She's educated, she's beautiful, she works incredibly hard, and she genuinely wants love and financial security. She goes on dates. She applies for promotions. She reads the self-help books. She does all the right things on the outside. But in her head, on a loop that she barely even notices anymore, is a soundtrack that sounds something like this. Money is hard to keep. I always end up alone. I don't really deserve the big stuff. People like me don't usually get that lucky. She doesn't say those things out loud. She'd never post them, but she thinks them constantly. And those thoughts, they are not just passive observations. They are instructions. They are literally programming her nervous system, her behavior, her body language, and her energy field in ways that silently sabotage every opportunity she creates for herself. That is what Louise Hay called a limiting belief. And the terrifying part is that most women have dozens of them, all running in the background, all completely invisible, all dismantling what their conscious mind is trying to build. Now I want to bring in someone here because I think it adds an important dimension to everything we're discussing. Bob Proctor, the legendary speaker, coach, and author of You Were Born Rich, spent over 50 years teaching the science of the mind and abundance. And Proctor always said something that perfectly complements Louise Hay's work. He said, "You are the sum total of your thoughts." And his entire teaching, like Hay's, was built on the recognition that most people are operating on a program they did not consciously choose. Bob Proctor used to talk about what he called the paradigm, the mental blueprint installed in you before the age of 7, mostly by people who weren't even aware they were installing it. Your parents' beliefs about money, the way the women around you talked about love, the messages your community sent about what women like you were allowed to want. All of that became your subconscious operating system. And here's the part that makes this so uncomfortable. That system is running you right now. Today. This very second. Proctor would say to audiences, if you want to know what's in your subconscious, look at your results. And that's not victim blaming. That's liberation. Because you can't change something you can't see. But once you see it, everything changes. And that's exactly what Louise Hay was doing. Helping women see the invisible walls they had built around their own lives and understand, possibly for the first time, that they had the power to tear them down. So let's get specific. Because vague self-help talk is useless. You need to know exactly how you are blocking your own abundance. And I mean abundance in every area. Love, money, confidence, health, joy, opportunity. All of it. The first way women block their own abundance is through a pattern that Louise Hay identified as one of the most destructive forces in a woman's inner world. And it's this, the refusal to truly receive. Not the inability, the refusal. There's a difference. How many times have someone offered you a compliment and you deflected it? Oh, this old thing. I just got lucky. You're too kind. How many times have you minimized your achievements, downplayed your beauty, or talked yourself out of something good before it could even fully arrive? That's not humility. That is a deeply ingrained belief that you are not worthy of being fully seen, fully appreciated, and fully loved. Louise Hay wrote extensively about this in her foundational book, You Can Heal Your Life. She identified that the core wound for most women is the belief that they are not enough. Not good enough. Not lovable enough. Not smart enough. Not worthy enough. And that belief expresses itself not through self-pity, but through the constant act of making yourself smaller, so that the universe doesn't accidentally give you more than you think you deserve. Here's how this plays out in dating, and this is going to hit differently for some of you. Imagine a woman, let's call her Serena. She's magnetic, she's funny, she's driven. A man comes into her life who is genuinely good. He's consistent. He's interested. He shows up. And instead of being excited, she feels suspicious. She thinks, he's too good to be true. What's wrong with him? This can't last. And so, almost unconsciously, she starts to push. She tests him. She pulls back. She picks fights about small things. She creates distance. And eventually, the good man, confused and exhausted, leaves. And her inner voice says, see? I knew it. Men always leave. I always end up alone. But here's the part she never sees. She didn't discover the truth. She created it. Her belief that she didn't deserve consistent love choreographed every single move until the outcome matched the story she'd already written. Louise Hay would look at Serena and say, "My darling, the love you're rejecting on the outside is the love you're refusing to give yourself on the inside." That sounds soft. That sounds like a cliché. But it is one of the most operationally true things ever said about human psychology. And Bob Proctor would add a dimension here that's worth understanding. He talked often about how we are emotionally attached to familiar feelings, even terrible ones. Chaos, rejection, and abandonment can feel more comfortable than peace, consistency, and love, simply because they are more familiar. Your nervous system doesn't prefer good feelings. It prefers known feelings. So you will unconsciously recreate the painful dynamics of your past over and over again, until you consciously interrupt the pattern. Now let's talk about money, because this is where so many women hold the most shame and the most hidden beliefs. Louise Hay had a chapter on prosperity in You Can Heal Your Life that I want you to think about carefully. She said, and I'm giving you the essence of her teaching here, that money is simply energy. It flows toward those who believe they deserve it, and away from those who secretly believe they don't. That sounds mystical, but let's make it practical. Think about how you talk about money when no one's listening. Think about the phrases that come naturally. I can't afford that. Money doesn't grow on trees. Rich people are selfish. I'm just not good with money. Every time I start to get ahead, something happens. Those aren't just phrases. They are beliefs. And beliefs are instructions to your brain about how to behave, what opportunities to notice, and what risks to take. Bob Proctor used to tell a story in his seminars that stuck with me. He talked about how most people treat money like a stranger they're suspicious of. They want it desperately, but they're terrified of it. They work for it, but they feel guilty spending it. They save it, but they secretly believe it'll disappear. And that conflicted relationship creates an energy, a vibration, a pattern of behavior that keeps money perpetually just out of reach. He'd say, "You don't attract what you want. You attract what you are." And Louise Hay would agree completely, just in slightly different language. She'd say, "The universe is a mirror. It reflects back what you believe about yourself." Here's the second massive block. And this one is sneaky because it disguises itself as a virtue. It's the habit of putting everyone else first as a way to avoid your own growth. I know that sounds harsh, but stay with me. So many women, especially nurturing, empathetic, generous women, have subconsciously learned that their needs are secondary. Maybe you learned it from watching your mother run herself ragged. Maybe you were praised as a child for being selfless and quiet and accommodating. Maybe somewhere along the way you decided that wanting things for yourself was greedy or arrogant or too much. And so you pour everything into everyone else. Your children, your partner, your job, your friends. You keep yourself so busy serving that you never have to face the terrifying question, what do I actually want for my own life? Louise Hay called this self-abandonment, and she was ruthless about naming it as a form of self-abuse masquerading as love. She said that you cannot pour from an empty cup, but she went even further than the cliché. She said that women who chronically sacrifice themselves are often operating from a deep belief that their worth is contingent on their usefulness. In other words, I am only lovable when I am serving someone. That belief will exhaust you. It will attract partners and employers and friends who take without giving. It will leave you depleted and resentful and secretly wondering why your abundance never seems to arrive, even though you're working harder than anyone. And here's something Bob Proctor said that cuts right to the heart of this. He would often talk about the difference between living in reaction versus living by design. Most people, most women in his experience, were living entirely in reaction, reacting to their circumstances, their past, other people's needs, societal expectations. They were not living from their own vision. They were surviving instead of creating. He'd ask audiences a simple question. If money were not an issue and you could not fail, what would your life look like? And the number of people, the number of women, who had never genuinely asked themselves that question was staggering. because they'd been so busy maintaining everyone else's life that they'd forgotten to build their own. This is how abundance gets blocked. Not by outside forces, but by the internal agreement to stay small, stay useful, stay manageable, and never ask for more than you've been given permission to want. Let me tell you about a third block that Louise Hay wrote about extensively, and it's possibly the most invisible of all. It's resentment. Old resentment. Carried resentment. The kind you've packed down so far that you've forgotten it's even there. The ex who betrayed you. The parent who didn't protect you. The friend who abandoned you when you needed her. The employer who passed you over. The version of yourself that made choices you're still ashamed of. Louise Hay was radical about this. She said, and this caused enormous controversy when she first taught it, that resentment is the #1 cause of disease, dysfunction, and blocked prosperity in a person's life. She wasn't saying your pain isn't valid. She wasn't saying what was done to you wasn't wrong. She was saying that carrying that resentment inside your body and your mind is like drinking poison and waiting for the other person to die. And you can heal your life. She made a case that is still ahead of its time. That our bodies literally express our unprocessed emotions. That chronic patterns of illness, financial struggle, relationship dysfunction, and self-destruction often have their roots in emotional wounds that were never properly addressed and released. And the most important word there is released. Not resolved. Not forgotten. Not justified. Released. Forgiveness, and I want to be very precise about what Louise Hay meant by this, is not a gift you give to the person who hurt you. It is a gift you give to yourself. It is the act of refusing to let someone else's behavior continue to govern your energy, your nervous system, and your future. Bob Proctor approached this from a slightly different angle. He talked about the idea that every thought you think has an emotional frequency, and that you are constantly broadcasting that frequency into every room you enter, every interaction you have, and every opportunity you encounter. If your inner world is dominated by unprocessed grief, anger, shame, or resentment, that is the energy you bring with you everywhere. And people feel it. Opportunities feel it. Abundance responds to it. He used to say, your emotions are the fuel of your results. And if the dominant fuel running through your system is bitterness or blame, then no amount of hard work, positive thinking, or strategy is going to override that signal. This is why two women can have the same education, the same talent, the same opportunities, and end up with completely different lives. It's not the outside circumstances. It's the inside climate. Now let's talk about something that most self-help spaces completely avoid. Let's talk about desire. Real desire. Feminine desire. The kind that women have been told explicitly and implicitly to be ashamed of. The desire for money, for luxury, for beauty, for powerful, passionate love, for recognition, for a life that is genuinely extraordinary. Louise Hay believed, and this was central to her entire teaching, that desire is sacred, that the wanting inside you is not selfishness. It is direction. It is your soul pointing at what it came here to experience and create. But so many women have internalized a message that wanting too much makes you difficult, makes you high maintenance, makes you unfeminine, makes you threatening. And so they silence their desire. They dress it down. They apologize for it. They frame it as something smaller and more acceptable than what it actually is. And then they wonder why they feel hollow. Why the relationship that looks perfect on paper doesn't quite satisfy them. Why the salary they fought so hard for still doesn't feel like enough. Because the real want, the deep, true, unapologetic want, was never allowed to breathe. There is a version of you that is fully expressed. That does not shrink. That does not apologize for her appetite for life. That wakes up in the morning with the kind of certainty that other people call confidence but is really just deep familiarity with her own worth. That woman exists. She is not a fantasy. She is the version of you that is currently blocked by every limiting belief, every inherited story, every swallowed resentment, and every unexamined "I'm not enough" that has been living rent-free in your subconscious for years. And here is what Louise Hay would say to you right now, and I want you to actually receive this instead of just hearing it. You are worthy of all good things. Not when you're thinner. Not when you're more successful. not when you've fixed yourself. Right now, as you are. You are worthy of love, of money, of joy, of extraordinary abundance, and any voice inside you that says otherwise is lying. Bob Proctor would frame it differently but arrive at the same place. He'd say, "You were born with everything you need. The universe is for you, not against you. Your only job is to stop being against yourself." And that phrase, "stop being against yourself," is really what this entire video is about. Every time you dismiss a compliment, you are being against yourself. Every time you tell yourself you can't afford something without questioning whether that belief is even true, you are being against yourself. Every time you replay the story of how you were wronged and let it define what you expect next, you are being against yourself. Every time you put everyone else's needs so far above your own that you disappear, you are being against yourself. And the universe, life, opportunity, love, money, none of it can reach you when you are your own most consistent opponent. Let's get into the solutions now, because awareness without application is just sophisticated suffering. The first thing Louise Hay taught, and this practice changed lives in ways that still feel almost unbelievable to skeptics, is mirror work. And I know that sounds simple. I know it might sound weird or soft or irrelevant, but before you skip past it, hear what it actually does. The practice is this. You stand in front of a mirror, you look yourself directly in the eyes, and you say out loud, "I love you. I really love you." And then you pay attention to what comes up. For most women, the first time they try this, something unexpected happens. They cry. Or they feel an instant internal rebellion, a voice that wants to immediately list everything wrong with them. Some women can't even hold their own gaze. And that reaction, that resistance, that flood of emotion, that almost physical discomfort is information. It is showing you exactly what your relationship with yourself actually looks like underneath all the functioning and managing and achieving. Louise Hay said that all the healing, all the abundance, all the transformation comes back to one foundational relationship, the one you have with yourself. And mirror work is the most direct, undefended way to see that relationship clearly. The second practice is something that both Louise Hay and Bob Proctor emphasize, though in different ways. It is the deliberate examination and replacement of your core beliefs. This is not just writing affirmations and hoping for the best. This is detective work. It requires you to go back to the thoughts that arise automatically around money, around love, around your worth, around what women like you are allowed to have, and ask where they came from. Bob Proctor used a simple framework. He'd ask, "Is this thought mine? Did I consciously choose it? Or did I inherit it, absorb it, accept it without examination? And then, is this thought true? Not just feels true. Actually demonstrably, evidentially true?" Because here's the thing about limiting beliefs, they masquerade as facts. "I'm not good with money" sounds like an observation, but it's a chosen story. "Relationships never work out for me" sounds like a pattern, but it's a programmed expectation that shapes behavior. "I don't have what it takes" sounds like realism, but it is self-imposed ceiling. Louise Hay would have you take each of those beliefs and write a new one. Not a fake, forced, cheesy affirmation that your brain immediately rejects, but a genuinely believable new story. Not "I am a millionaire" if you're living paycheck to paycheck, but maybe, "Money is flowing more easily to me now. I am learning to receive love without sabotaging it. I am worthy of success and I am building toward it every day." The brain doesn't need to believe the destination. It needs to believe the direction. The third practice, and this one is underrated almost everywhere, is the practice of gratitude as a vibrational reset. Not gratitude as a performance. Not the kind you list perfunctorily in a journal to check a wellness box. Real gratitude. Searching gratitude. The kind that makes you sit still and genuinely acknowledge the evidence that your life contains good things, that you are being supported, that abundance in some form is already here. Bob Proctor talked about gratitude as a frequency. He said that it is physiologically and psychologically impossible to feel genuine gratitude and genuine fear or scarcity at the same moment. They cannot coexist, which means that every time you return to real gratitude, you are actively interrupting the scarcity program. Louise Hay wrote that gratitude opens the door to more. Not in some magical transactional sense, but in the very literal sense that a mind focused on lack will continue to find evidence of lack, while a mind trained to find abundance will begin to notice abundance everywhere. And noticing opportunity is literally the first step to receiving it. Now let me talk about something that ties all of this together. Something that Louise Hay considered the master key to all transformation. Self-love. Not self-obsession. Not narcissism. Not arrogance. Real, rooted, unconditional self-love. The kind that does not depend on your weight, your relationship status, your bank account, your productivity, or your performance. The kind that says, I am worthy of care, of consideration, of good things, simply because I exist. Full stop. This is the most radical idea in Louise Hay's entire body of work, because the world we live in has a tremendous investment in keeping women uncertain about their own worth. Uncertain women are easier to sell to, easier to control, easier to manipulate in relationships, easier to underpay and overwork. A woman who is genuinely, deeply certain of her own value is a woman who cannot be easily exploited. She knows what she deserves. She will not accept less. She will not chase what should be meeting her halfway. She will not dim her light so others feel comfortable. She will not apologize for wanting what she wants. That woman is not arrogant. She is not difficult. She is not too much. She is fully realized. And every limiting belief, every inherited wound, every pattern of self-abandonment and resentment and scarcity thinking is simply standing between you and becoming her. Bob Proctor used to tell audiences a story about a conversation he had with Earl Nightingale, the man who first mentored him in the principles of success. Nightingale told him something that changed his life completely. He said, Bob, if you plant a seed of corn and a seed of nightshade in the same soil, the soil doesn't discriminate. It grows both with equal devotion. Your subconscious mind is the same. It will grow whatever you plant in it, the beautiful and the poisonous, with perfect impartial faithfulness. That image has never left me because it is exactly Louise Hay's central message in scientific language. Your mind is not on your side or against you. It is faithful. It grows what you give it. And for years, maybe for decades, most women have been handing it weeds without realizing it. The question is, what are you planting from this moment forward? Let me bring this home with something personal. Imagine a woman who has spent her entire adult life waiting to be chosen, waiting for her circumstances to change, waiting for permission to want more, waiting until she's lost the weight, paid off the debt, healed from the last heartbreak, figured out the next step. She is waiting as if abundance were a train she has to earn her ticket for. Louise Hay would say to her, stop waiting. There is no train coming. There is only right now, and the decision you make right now about who you are and what you deserve. Because here is the truth that most women never fully receive. Abundance is not something that happens to you when you're finally ready, finally worthy, finally enough. Abundance is something you step into by choosing radically and completely to stop blocking it. You stop blocking it when you stop dismissing your own compliments. When you sit with good things instead of bracing for them to disappear. When you choose to speak kindly about money instead of treating it like an enemy. When you forgive, not for the other person but for your own freedom. When you dare to look in the mirror and actually mean it when you say, I love you. When you stop pouring yourself empty for people who never ask how you're doing. When you choose your own desire over someone else's comfort with your smallness. This is not soft work. This is the hardest work there is, because it requires you to go against every programming you've received, every cultural message about keeping your head down, and every wound that told you wanting things for yourself was dangerous. But here's what I know. And here's what Louise Hay knew after a life spent watching thousands of women transform their realities from the inside out. The moment a woman genuinely decides she is worthy, not when she's fixed, not when she's proven herself, not when she's finally earned enough approval, everything shifts. Opportunities that were always there begin to appear. Relationships that were always possible begin to arrive. Money that was always available begins to move. Not because the universe suddenly started cooperating, but because you finally stopped standing in your own way. Bob Proctor, in his final years of teaching, used to leave audiences with one question. Just one. He'd say, "What do you want?" Not "What do you think you can have?" Not "What do you think you deserve?" Not "What other people expect of you?" "What do you want?" That is Louise Hay's question too. Underneath all the healing work, all the affirmations, all the mirror exercises and belief excavation, there is a woman who has something she came here to experience and create. And every block, every belief, every moment of self-abandonment has simply been standing between her and that vision. You know what you want. You've always known. Maybe you've whispered it to yourself late at night when no one could hear. Maybe you've talked yourself out of it so many times that it feels like a fantasy now. But it is not a fantasy. It is a blueprint. It is direction. It is the truest thing about you. So here is what I want to challenge you to do right now. Not tomorrow. Not after you've watched more videos or read more books or waited until you feel ready. Right now. I want you to take one belief, just one that you have been carrying about yourself, about love, about money, about what you deserve, that you know is not true but that you have been living as if it is. Just one. Find it. Name it. Write it down if you can. And then I want you to ask yourself, how would my life be different if I simply stopped believing that? Not overnight. Not perfectly. But incrementally, deliberately, with the same consistency you give to everything else in your life. What would it look like to begin to release that story? To stop feeding it evidence? To plant something better in its place? Louise Hay didn't teach transformation as a dramatic overnight event. She taught it as a practice, a daily, patient, compassionate practice of choosing again and again to speak to yourself and about yourself as someone who is worthy of an extraordinary life. Because you are. You genuinely are. And the world needs you to know it. Not just for your sake, though that alone would be enough, but because women who know their worth change everything around them. They raise children who know their worth. They create relationships built on genuine respect. They build businesses that make real impact. They show up in the world with a kind of energy that gives other women permission to do the same. That is the real abundance Louise Hay was pointing at. Not just money, not just romantic love, but the full, unapologetic expression of a woman who has stopped blocking herself from her own life. That is what is available to you. It has always been available to you. The only question, the question that has always been the only question, is whether you are willing to stop standing in the way. I hope today is the day you say yes. Subscribe. Comment your biggest block below. Share this with a woman who needs it. Asterisk.